Well, hello and welcome to In the News, a segment from the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm here with you today to share another segment from the news. We do this on a somewhat random basis. We share stories from the news, we talk a little bit about them, and talk about issues that are important. So with that, I've got another segment to share with you today, and what we'll do is what we always do. We will go through the segment, we'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll see what happens from there. So I've got a segment I'm going to get started here for you.
Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence wants an old-fashioned solution to help solve today's problem of violent behavior in schools.
Now, I want to pause there for a second. Wants an old-fashioned solution. Now, this story is about corporal punishment. And, I'm a huge believer that when we know better, we do better. And when it comes to corporal punishment, the data's in. We know better. We know that corporal punishment is harmful to kids. We know that corporal punishment leads to trauma. We know that corporal punishment probably leads to an increase in aggression and behaviors. So there's a lot of data out there in terms of corporal punishment. And the fact is, we should not be hitting schools. That is, we should not be hitting kids in school. That is child abuse. That is not discipline. Discipline should really be about teaching and helping individuals to grow. So using the words old-fashioned approach is not really appropriate here. Call it what it is. This is child abuse. This is state-sanctioned child abuse. Also, I want to take some exception with the word violent. Now, I don't want to minimize this. I understand that there are big behaviors happening in schools around the country. I understand that we have a lot of individuals, we have a lot of students that have experienced trauma. We have a lot of stress responses. We have a lot of kids that are really on alert. We have a lot of educators that have also experienced trauma. These have been tough times. These past couple of years have been very tough. And even before that, things were difficult. So we certainly have a situation where we are seeing a lot of big behaviors in classrooms across the country. And certainly that needs attention. But what that solution isn't is hitting kids. What that solution isn't is perpetuating violence against children. Absolutely, we need solutions in place to help, but this is really about going upstream. This is about how do we better support individuals. So anyway, let's get on with the story here.
Conversation with Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker for KCCI's Coffee with the Candidate series. Amanda, this turned some heads here. He wants more traditional discipline in schools.
Yes, Scott, that was part of his answer on how to help solve the uptick in school violence across the country. The topic came up when I sat down with Pence and three undecided Iowa Republicans. They asked him about issues that matter to them. A retired teacher in Polk City asked Pence what he would do if he was president to help school districts and their teachers deal with extreme behavior problems in their classrooms. Here's what Pence had to say.
And that's a fantastic question, Now, what authority the president has over this is to be debated, but it's a great question to say, what can we do? I mean, there is a problem right now. There is a problem. We're seeing a lot of big behaviors in classrooms across the country. But if we dig deeper, we know that there are a lot of children that have been exposed to significant trauma. We know that there are a lot of children that aren't having their needs appropriately met. The answer to these behaviors is not perpetuating violence against children. So it really is a great question and one that deserves a good response. But let's listen here and see what's said.
I went to Catholic school for 8 years. The Board of Education was applied to my seat of knowledge more than once.
The Board of Education. So, he's obviously talking about corporal punishment. He's talking about being paddled. And he's talking about his experience, that he was paddled at school, that he was subjected to physical violence at school. Now, I'm not surprised by that. It's not been something that's been terribly uncommon over time. And in fact, I myself went to a number of private religious schools where I was also subjected to corporal punishment. But I don't or can't stop and say, well, I turned out okay. So that must mean there's nothing wrong with violence against children. because I was able to somehow make it past that experience. This is not okay. It is never okay to hit a child. It's certainly not okay to hit a child in a school setting. This is not something that should be being done. And despite the fact that it may have happened to you, you may have experienced it, doesn't make it something that we should be doing. We know better. There is solid science here to tell us that corporal punishment is harmful and certainly shouldn't be allowed in schools. Our record here in the United States is horrid when it comes to violence against children.
In those 8 years. And the nuns knew how to get the paddle out when you deserved it. I guarantee you I deserved it more times than I got it.
So he guarantees you he deserves it more times than he got it. Wow, must have not been very effective if he actually was doing more things than he was actually caught for. Corporal punishment is not effective. In fact, what we know is it leads to trauma. That trauma leads kids to be hypervigilant, be always on alert, be more apt to have distress or stress-related behaviors, and guess what? Be more likely to get in trouble again. And often what you find is you find kids that are on the other side of punitive discipline, whether it's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, or corporal punishment. These are kids that are often cycled through these things over and over again, each time doing more and more damage. So, I'm sorry that this happened to him, and I'm sorry that it happened to anyone. We should not be hitting kids. We shouldn't have been hitting kids 40 years ago. We shouldn't be hitting kids today in school. It's not appropriate.
I think traditional discipline being returned to our schools as opposed to flooding our kids with Ritalin and other behavior modification chemicals makes more sense to me. The Bible says.
So we should hit kids rather than help kids is what I'm hearing there. And again, you can call it traditional discipline, but when we know better and you call it traditional discipline, you're really not being honest about what it is. It is harmful. It is abusive. It should not be happening. I believe he started to say in the Bible, and we'll continue on here.
Spare the rod, spoil the child. I'm a believer in that. But I also think the American people deserve to know that many of our public schools are medicating kids in.
Obviously, don't want to get into a conversation about politics or religion, but certainly it always concerns me when I see religion being used as a way to justify violence against children, as a way to justify harming people. So I'll just leave that there.
Of disciplining kids. And I think we ought to get back to more traditional discipline, allow schools, make it clear that that's acceptable. Just as it was in our time.
What's interesting about this is that, very often, and again, this is not about the individual here. This is not about Mike Pence. It's about what we hear, what we're hearing in the public square and conversations about this. And very often you hear people that, we need this traditional discipline, which of course I believe is a term that shouldn't be used. But, really what we're saying is that we need to beat kids into compliance to make them do the things we want them to do. And that's not okay. And what's interesting is very often the same people that believe that we need to be tough on kids in schools also believe we need to be tough on crime. And, we need to incarcerate people, and we need to show them that we mean it. And what's interesting about this is that what's happening in schools, if you want to increase corporal punishment, if you want more kids to be hit in school, you know what you're going to do? You're going to feed more kids into prison. The school-to-prison pipeline is a real thing, and what happens is kids that are on the wrong side of lots of punitive discipline, kids that don't get help, do you know what happens? When school is not a safe place for you, when you're getting hit at school by the people that are there to help you, that is extremely traumatic. And kids that are on the wrong side of a lot of these punitive approaches, they become disengaged. School is not a safe place. It's not a welcoming place. And when kids become disengaged, they become more likely to drop out. When they become more likely to drop out, they're more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. They're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. This idea of the school-to-prison pipeline is alive and well. And the idea of bringing back corporal punishment is a way to push more kids down that school-to-prison pipeline. So if you want to do something to curb crime, you need to stop hurting people. You need to stop doing things to people and help them and support them, especially when we're talking about children.
You heard his words there, traditional discipline. This is part of a larger conversation that we had with Mike Pence. Iowans asked him where.
So traditional discipline, we can end it there. Again, this idea that let's make a tradition out of hitting kids is the wrong tradition for us to make. We know better. We should do better. If you look at, and of course the United States has not signed off on the United Nations, work around children's rights. And that's unconscionable in my mind, and certainly we should. But as long as people are out there saying these things, that we should use traditional discipline, we should hit children if they don't meet our expectations, we're going to continue to go in the wrong direction. So again, politics aside, religion aside, there's a tremendous amount of research out there about harming children, about really perpetuating violence against kids. Absolutely, I'm a believer that if we know better, we should be doing better. And in this case, we absolutely know better. We should be doing better. Thanks for joining us, and we will be back again soon.